my colleague, Mrs. Anne-Marie Howard Brown, who is the curator at the Jamaica National Heritage Trust, to do the opening prayer.
Let us pray. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for today. We thank you for friends and family. We thank you for letting us gather after a pandemic, that we can gather here face to face. I ask you to bless the speakers and bless all of those who are coming. Through your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you so very much, Mrs. Howard Brown. Very short and spicy. Thank you so very much. Now, I would like to highlight to say that Heritage Month this year is being celebrated under the theme Reigniting Greatness Through Our Heritage. And it is important for us as an institution, as a statutory agency within the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport to continue to preserve, promote, and protect the heritage of Jamaica. At this time, I'm going to invite our colleague, Mrs. Georgia Rookwood, to bring the opening remarks on behalf of our Executive Director, Mrs. Michelle Creed Nelson, who is unavoidably absent this morning. She sends her regret, but she had some urgent matters to attend to. Mrs. Rookwood.
Thank you, Mrs. Bailey. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Executive Director of the Jamaica National Heritage Trust, Mrs. Michelle Creed Nelson, I would like to extend a warm welcome to everyone to this, our second lecture in recognition of our Heritage Month celebrations. As you heard, this year, Heritage Month is being celebrated under the theme Reigniting Greatness Through Heritage. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of our guest speaker, Mr. Stephen Golden, President of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, Jamaica. I would also like to recognize the teachers and students from the schools present here today. To our specially invited guests and to those watching online, welcome. The lecture this morning will focus on our first national hero, the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and his contribution to the development of the capital city of Kingston. This year marks the 150th anniversary of the transfer of Jamaica's capital from Spanish Town to Kingston. We consider it of utmost importance to highlight the people and the events that make us who we are today. As a statutory agency of the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport, the Jamaica National Heritage Trust remains committed to its mandate of protecting, promoting, and preserving Jamaica's tangible heritage. It is with pride that we sensitize individuals to our heritage through forums such as this. We are also happy to be able to host physical activities again, considering the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our public education programs. As you listen to the presentations today, I sincerely hope that you will grasp even more knowledge on Marcus Garvey and his connections to Kingston, as well as gain a better understanding of the role of history in the Jamaican landscape. As Marcus Garvey said, a people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. Once again, a warm welcome to everyone, and I implore you to embrace our heritage. Do enjoy.
Thank you so very much, Mrs. Rookwood. At this time, I'm going to invite our secondary speaker to make his presentation. That's Mr. Duane Harris. He is the Public Education Officer at the Jamaica National Heritage Trust. He is a teacher by profession, and he has been with the Jamaica National Heritage Trust for some time now. Mr. Harris will be speaking on Marcus Garvey's footprints on Kingston. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Duane Harris.
Greetings, everyone. Good morning. Right, so the topic of my talk is Marcus Garvey's footprints on Kingston. As was indicated earlier, this year is it's the 150th anniversary of Kingston becoming the capital of Jamaica, and it's also the 135th year of the birth of Marcus Garvey. And it's always a good time to talk about Marcus Garvey. And of course, we all know it's Jamaica 60. So, this year is a big year. What I'll be doing in my presentation is to look at some places in Kingston, our good city, that Marcus Garvey had some interaction with, and shed some light on some of these places. And some of them you may know, some of them you may not know. All right, so Marcus Garvey, as we know, was born in St. Anne's Bay on August 17, 1887. And after he spent some time there, he migrated to Kingston in 1904, December 1904. He was about 16. And he came to Kingston. Now, very interestingly, when Marcus Garvey came to Kingston, he came here to work as a 16-year-old. And his first place of employment was P.A. Benjamin Manufacturing Company. It is what we call Benjamin's today, and it is located at East Street, at the corner of East Street and Charles Street, just up the road. And he worked there, and in 2 years he became a foreman. Apparently he worked as a printer. He had printing experience already in St. Anne, and he came to Kingston and worked as a printer. And while he was there, he rose up the rank and became a foreman. Now, apparently a foreman is a very important position because at the time, Jamaica was still getting foremen from England to operate printing presses, whatever. So apparently it was very impressive for this young man to be a foreman, a black man, a Jamaican man who came from St. Anne and was a foreman. While he was here at P.A. Benjamin's, he got involved in a strike. He was concerned about working conditions, and as a result of that, although he was a foreman, which is a senior position, he was very concerned about the lower workers, and if I may call them that, forgive the term, and he was fired for his effort. The strike failed and he was fired. He couldn't get another job, so he eventually worked with the government printing services. So very interestingly, on the outside of the store, Benjamin's, which is uptown, they have a sign on the wall indicating that Marcus Garvey worked here, and it points out the years that he worked there from 1905 to 1909. So that is the first place where Marcus Garvey worked while he was in Kingston. That's a little history there for you. Now, Marcus Garvey, when he came to Kingston, he, checked out a number of places, and he was very active. And one of the places that he went to was East Queen Street Baptist Church. Now, this is a very important building. It was dedicated in 1822, so it has been around for a while. And it was started by a black American preacher who came to Jamaica. He was a former enslaved person, and he came to Jamaica and he did a lot of preaching in Kingston, and he appealed especially to the enslaved population. And so he started a church in 1822. So this is a very important church in Kingston, East Queen Street Baptist Church. And as a matter of fact, at one time, please don't ask me the year, but it was said to have the largest congregation of Baptist persons around the world. So this apparently was the biggest Baptist church in the entire world at one point. So it's a very significant church. Our good friend Marcus Garvey went to this place. They were having a debate shortly after he came to Kingston, and he found favor with one of the presenters. She was debating a moot, and he liked how she looked, how she sounded. It turns out that this person was Amy Ashwood, and Amy Ashwood is significant because this would be his first, eventually his first wife. But outside of his personal life, she became the secretary of the UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, which you could say both of them founded. She is said to be the first member of the UNIA, and we could say that started at the East Queen Street Baptist Church, which still, of course, exists today. All right, now Garvey was said to have property in Kingston, or we can say Kingston and St. Andrew, and this is where it is. This is at the corner of Lady Musgrave Road and Lady Musgrave Road and Trafalgar Road, right? So I cannot, well, so there's this building here, there's this wonderful sign here that says small small business association. And when you go onto that property, there are indeed quite a few small businesses that are there. And I find it very instructive that businesses are operating at a place where Marcus Garvey once lived, because Marcus Garvey was a believer that black people, children of Africa, should have their own businesses. You know, it's a way of getting independence and power and influence in society when people of African descent manage their own business affairs. So this is somewhere where Marcus Garvey lived. The property was much bigger. It ran across the street over to where there's a set of apartments now, as well as another business complex. Right. So that is that. There's a marker there to show of Marcus Garvey's statue, but when I went there yesterday, it seemed to have been under repair, so it's covered. But under normal circumstances, this is what it looks like. So there is a bust of Marcus Garvey as a reminder of his presence, that he once owned a property and lived there. All right. Good. Now we go to Liberty Hall. Now, Liberty Hall is very important. It was attached to Marcus Garvey UNIA, as I indicated. That was established, and it was established in around 1914, and it became the center of activities for the organization. That's where people met, lectures, social activities, and those things were done at this venue. So it is regarded as the first meeting hall in Jamaica that was owned and operated by black people. You know, there are a number of clubs and societies around the country at the time, and these were all exclusively operated and owned by white males. So Marcus Garvey was introducing a new concept in Jamaica where black people could have a public space besides church where they could come and feel free to meet, to plan activities, play games, have concerts, have dances, write and recite their own poems, present their own art, works of art that were comfortable to them. Basically, to be free, to be black. And maybe that is why it was called Liberty Hall. And so Liberty Halls were very important, and indeed right across the world, wherever the UNIA was, it was important and mandated that Liberty Halls should be attached to these organizations. And at the height of Marcus Garvey's movement, there were a total of about 1,400 of them. So educational programs were held there, and of course, many persons benefited. Eventually, the property was lost, but it was reacquired by the government in 1987 for the 100th anniversary, sorry, 1987 for the 100th anniversary of the birth of Marcus Garvey. And it was eventually restored in 2003. And it is now used as a library, as a multimedia museum, as a computer center, as a meeting place to have public functions and events. So after the property was lost for some time, it is now being used again since 2003 for the original purpose that Marcus Garvey intended. So it's now carrying on the Garvey legacy. Now, the word theater is also significant to Marcus Garvey's movement. The word theater was established in 1911, and it was a gift to Kingston by Mr. Ward, Colonel, I think it was Colonel, yeah, James Ward. He was the custos of Kingston, but very interestingly, he was the person associated with the company that we now call J. Ray and Nephew. Now, very interestingly, I have always noticed that there's a Ray and Nephew bar next to the Ward Theatre. I didn't bother to take a photograph of it, and I'm wondering if it's because of that historic association why Ray and Nephew is always there. But he was a custos of Kingston and was a very rich man, and he gave this as a gift. He gave it as a gift to Kingston. Incidentally, where the Ward Theatre is now, a theatre existed before from the 1700s, and basically Ward replaced the one was there out of his own money, and because he was such a nice man, he gave it to Kingston. So it means therefore Kingston owns the Ward Theatre, which is something I'm going to get back to later. Now, very interestingly, Marcus Garvey held political meetings here in the 1920s and 30s after he was deported and returned to Jamaica. And in one case, he booked the World Theatre. Marcus Garvey was trying to be a member of the KSAC, you know, what we now call parish council, right? And the parish council owns the World Theatre. So here where we're going. I'm sure Mr. Golden would expound on this. The point is he applied for it, paid for it, everything. And when he turned up the day for the meeting to be held inside, the door was locked. He couldn't get access. So the meeting was held outside of the World Theatre. So he held meetings inside and outside. The World Theatre has been used for meetings, plays, concerts, what have you. And a lot of you probably don't know, but even in my short lifetime, I have attended concerts and plays inside the World Theatre, but it has been closed for a while. And hopefully it will reopen in my lifetime. Right, so this is a place associated with Marcus Garvey. Then we move on to another place. I will call it Edelweiss Park. Now, after Marcus Garvey had a number of challenges which Mr. Golden will speak about in terms of property and losing property. When after he was deported to Jamaica, he acquired another property in 1928, and this became the international headquarters of the UNIA between 1929 to 1935. In 1935, Marcus Garvey left Jamaica. Now, so this property was where meetings were held. He had two international conventions. He had a few international conventions where representatives from the UNIA came from all over the world to this place on Slipe Road, 67 Slipe Road, where all types of meetings were held. The Black Cross Nurses, that is an association of Marcus Garvey, met there. The African Legion, the Juveniles. The Juveniles was the children's group associated with UNIA. It was a cultural center, bands, choirs, drama presentations, and all sorts of cultural and intellectual activities. It sounds like the Rising Star and JCDC, all of these things. This is probably where it started. Elocution contests, a dance contest, music presentation, and of course, religious services. And Garvey himself was a playwright. He was a poet. He wrote songs, and his songs and those things were presented here as well. So this is now on 67 Slap Road. In the short time, I was trying to find what it looked like then, but I couldn't. But this is what it looks like now. This is where Rainforest is. The pork shop, National, as an outlet, there is a business complex. And some time ago, I remember seeing a sign indicating something about it. But when I went back this week, I realized the sign wasn't there, indicating the significance of this spot to Marcus Garvey. Now, again, Marcus Garvey's group lost this property. And funny enough, this property became the headquarters of the first headquarters of the People's National Party. Now I'm just going to digress a bit, but it's the People's National Party in this regard is very interesting, and one could say it was strategic that this property was eventually acquired by this new political party, the PNP, because it was a place where people were accustomed to coming. It was a center of attention. So if Garvey and his movement left and you can acquire it, then it would people would be accustomed to coming to this place to check it out to see what was happening. Very interestingly, Marcus Garvey had a political party called the People's Political Party. Is it very close to another political party that we know, the People's National Party? One wonders if it's a coincidence or, if it was a strategic move. Who knows? Right. So as I indicated, today this is what it is. There's no sign of what happened at the time when Marcus Garvey was around, but we know that 67 Slide Road is a very important place in terms of Marcus Garvey's footprints in Kingston. Marcus Garvey left Jamaica in 1935 for all types of reasons. He went to live in the many places, and he died in London, in England, well, London maybe to be exact, in 1940. And so he was buried there. But after 1962, the government of Jamaica became interested in the return of his body to Kingston for it to be buried, where he was regarded as he was declared Jamaica's first national hero, and he was buried here. Now, there have been a lot of controversies as to if it was really Marcus Garvey's real body that was exhumed and brought to Jamaica. There's been some controversy, but I don't want to get into that. But I'm just stating that I would like to think that it is Marcus Garvey's final remains that were actually brought here. Now, the shrine is not just made, for as a work of art, but it is very symbolic. It has a number of symbolic things about it that reflected Marcus Garvey's life and his achievements. So, for example, it is made in the form of a star. Of course, Marcus Garvey had an organization called the Black Star Line, which was a shipping company, and that is reflected in that. And some people would say that Marcus Garvey was a bright black star, so why not have his tomb in the form of a star? The top of the tomb looks great, actually should be black. It's burnt out by the tropical sun, again, reinforcing the blackness of the star. Also, on the top, you'll see a black cross, significant again. Marcus Garvey was very interested in blackness, black images of God, black angels, that kind of thing. And of course, he had an organization called the Black Cross Nurses. And so that is there. Now, to the back, there's a bust of Marcus Garvey, of course, and to the back, you'll see what appears to be several flagpoles. When you have official functions and so forth, there's a Jamaican flag there, and of course, the UNIA flag. But there are 3 other poles, and at the top of each one is a black star. And as I indicated, it's not any coincidence. All of this is very symbolic to reflect the life and achievement of Mr. Garvey. And it's 3 black stars, and they represent the 3 ships that Marcus Garvey's Black Star Line had. Now, the Black Star Line Company, I just want to speak about this very, very briefly. It was a shipping company created for all types of reasons, and it was mainly associated with North America. But it was just very big and very important. Up to the time, it was unheard of that black people would have something called a shipping company, right? The shipping company ran into problems, but it was a very important move, and it was at the height of Marcus Garvey's influence at the time that he had it. And of course, it eventually led to his downfall. So he had three ships, the Yarmouth, the Shady Side, and the Kanawha. And each flagpole with each black star is representative of that. So Marcus Garvey, in the last 150 years of the history of Kingston, I would like to think Marcus Garvey certainly is as one of the more enduring legacies and influence on Kingston, and I would like to think the influence continues. Hopefully, the influence continues with you in your studies, and you'll take it from here. Right, so that is that concerning some of the places that Marcus Garvey's footprints were imprinted on Kingston. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Harris, for such informative presentation. I hope you were all enlightened by that. At this time, I'm going to ask you to take note of your comments. Please take notes of your comments and your questions, and we will take all of them at the end of Mr. Golding's presentation. Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to invite Mrs. Anne-Marie Howard Brown to make her way back to the lectern to introduce our guest presenter.
Good morning again. If I stand behind the podium, no one will see me. So that's the reason why that's the reason why I stand beside it. Okay, I hope you can hear me. And I would like to welcome Mr. Golding, all the boys and girls, and men and women. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Stephen Golding. Mr. Golding is the president of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, and the African Communities League in Jamaica. He is also a professor of Garveyism at the Hydel University in St. Catherine. He lectures on the philosophy of Marcus Garvey at the primary, secondary, and tertiary level. He has executively produced media content on radio, television since the early 2000s, and is also the founding director of Jamaica's only authentic African cuisine restaurant, Cafe Africa. Mr. Golding, where is that?
In the Small Business Association, right next to the bus stop, Marcus.
Thank you very much. So we need to visit Cafe Africa. He has served as a member of the Jamaica National Council on Reparation, the Institute of Jamaica Council, and he is the chairman of the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica and the Jamaica Memory Bank. Now, Mr. Golding, and everybody hearing the name Golding, anybody can guess who his father is? Mr. Golding is the son of Jamaica's 8th Prime Minister, Bruce Golding, and the grandson of Jamaica's first Speaker of the House of Representatives post-independence, Tertius Golding. He's a graduate of the Johns Hopkins University, and he's married. Anybody know who he married to? One pretty lady, Empress Golding. You ever hear about Empress Golding? Yes. And together they have one son, Tertius Cush Golding, and a daughter, Zephora Annually Golding. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please give a warm welcome to a Garveyite, a person who believes in Marcus Garvey, Stephen Golding.
I'm not so vertically challenged. Thank you for the introduction, Mrs. Brown. A lot of people are stumble over the word Tatius, particularly when I'm outside of Jamaica or if they don't come from St. Catherine. So I appreciate that. Yes, grandson of Tatius, now father of Tatius. Good morning, everyone. How are you all? I heard them greeting boys and girls, but those, you all look like sixth formers. Sixth form? Kingston Technical sixth form in the back? 10 and 11. So still young men and young women. All right. Let me also thank the Heritage Trust for inviting me. Certainly appreciated Mr. Harris's presentation. Morning, Miss Bailey. Where to start? I don't have a lot of pictures, but I don't know. Maybe I can use some of Mr. Harris's pictures because I was going to touch on a few of those places. Usually when I lecture, I really lecture about the philosophy of Marcus Garvey because I believe it is one of the greatest tools for social engineering and re-engineering for this nation. And we need some of that. Students from Kingston Technical High School, you will know what I'm speaking about. My condolences on that tragic incident. But I firmly believe that if people were to embrace Garveyism as a philosophy, if they understand the concept that Garvey promoted as race first, we would not be so unjust to each other. As he wrote in a poem once from prison, Bob Marley later put it to song, man to man is so unjust until we know not whom to trust. You all know that song? You never know it's Marcus Garvey write it. Marcus write plenty song, Bob sing. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Garvey write that too. Wrote a lot of poetry, wrote a lot of music. In fact, he had a hit song in 1925 on the summer charts in Harlem called Keep Cool when he was first incarcerated. But let's begin to talk about Marcus Garvey's Kingston experience, his trials and his triumphs. Garvey came to Kingston in late 1905. Some say 1906. I want to make a little correction to what Mr. Harris said. Because before he came to Kingston to work for P.A. Benjamin, he worked for his godfather, Sir Alfred Burroughs, first in St. Anne's Bay and then in Port Maria. People forget that sometimes, and those of you from St. Mary must claim Garvey also. Yes, from St. Mary? That is where he honed his skills. That's why when he came to Kingston, he was able to get a job as a foreman. Because by the time he had moved from St. Anne's Bay to Port Maria, he was now setting the printry. You remember his godfather was a printer who trained him in St. Anne's Bay and had him running his other printry in Port Maria for a time. So when Garvey came to Kingston and applied to P.A. Benjamin, he was applying from the point of view of already being a foreman. And that is how he was able to get that job at such a young age. Mr. Harris was right in pointing that out. Not quite 16, but round about 18, going on to his 19th year. Now, one of the things he left out was the fact that when Garvey moved to Kingston, he lived in West Kingston. He lived with a very close family friend and somebody who would remain very close to him for the rest of his life, a man by the name of Thaddeus Alexander McCormack, who had residence at 13 Pink Lane in what was then known as Smith Village. Who knows what that is called today? Let me see if you don't really know Kingston. Smith Village is today known as? Huh? No. Might be a little part of Trenchtown. Denham Town. How from I say Pink Lane? Garvey lived at 13 Pink Lane. Lived at 13 Pink Lane before he began to travel. Harris, I have to let you know that the UNIA was directly responsible for that sign being put up. We did that in 2014 on the occasion of our centenary. We also had Rainforest put up a sign. There was to be 3 signs. KSAC was to put up one at the corner of Charles Street and Orange Street, which I'll tell you about later. That never materialized. The sign at Rainforest later came down. We've been querying them for 2 years. They say it is to be refurbished to put up. But them taking so long now, I have a whole idea. Said if we put up a whole design on the wall that they have in their parking area. But we'll get to that later. When Garvey came and was working for P.A. Benjamin, and Mr. Harris is right, he began to get involved in the politics, industrial politics. This is an early time in Jamaica where our rights as black people were still being fought for. Remember, Garvey was born 20 years after the quote-unquote Morant Bay Rebellion, which was really just black people advocating, 1, for the right to vote, and 2, for better wages, and just questioning what had changed in our condition between the emancipation of 1834 and 30 years later when we had to march on the governor's office to say, yo, we're not dealing with black people right. That's what Paul Bogle did. You know? Coincidentally, Paul Bogle met another national hero by the name of George William Gordon, at a place known as Kingston Racecourse. Anybody know where Kingston Racecourse is today? What used to be Kingston? Hero Circle, that Mr. Harris was referring to, where the Garvey Shrine is. So here's another interesting tidbit about Kingston. That used to be a racehorse track where people would go and bet on horses. But for a long time, it was also a place where people gathered and a lot of street preaching went on. The man who started preaching there, Mr. Harris didn't call his name, was a man by the name of George Lyle, who started the East Queen Street Baptist Church. George Lyle, this is an important name to remember, came from Savannah, Georgia, once enslaved, as Mr. Harris said. How did he get his freedom? Well, remember, America fought a revolutionary war for their independence in the 1770s, right? But did you know that during that war, the British, in order to gain some momentum, to disrupt the American colonial order, as a means of propaganda too, issued a proclamation that any black person, enslaved or not, who would join their side, we're going to allow them to come in a second, would be given their freedom. Come on in, Charlie Smith. I want you all to listen to me carefully. In the 1770s in the United States of America, when Britain began to fight her colonists, often we hear about the Boston Tea Party, we hear about the Declaration of Independence, but very little spotlight is put on the fact that the British offered enslaved Africans at the time that if they would take up arms against the American colonists to defend the British interests, that they would be granted their freedom from slavery. Now, how many of you, if you were enslaved in America at the time, would have taken that offer? Don't just put up your hand, because you see my hand not go up, you know. Because we're not in the slavery thing. You have to take up arms and fight the Americans to remain as a part of the British Empire. Well, a lot of enslaved Africans did. I see the whole of you never lift up on hand. What, I'm afraid of little war? For your freedom? Man telling you, say, one war for your freedom or a lifetime of enslavement. Remember, after 1770, you know, it took the Americans 100 years before they emancipated those same Africans. You guys are late, so you need to come in a little quiet. Don't disturb us. Welcome. Thanks for coming. I just started. George Lyle was one of the persons in the United States who took up that offer. And he took up arms against the Americans. But guess what? Who won that war? The Americans or the British? The Americans won the war. So the British lost. So the British now had a problem when they lost, that all these black people that they had promised to emancipate, and they kept their word, they did. They couldn't leave them in America because the Americans would have punished them as enemies of their new state. So they had to evacuate them. A lot of them ended up in Canada, in places like Nova Scotia and Halifax. Halifax is where Marcus Garvey in 1937 gave that speech where he said, we are going to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. For whilst others have freed our bodies, none but ourselves can free our minds. And the reason why Garvey had such a strong presence in Canada is because of these same black people 100 years prior who had been resettled there. The British called them loyalists, British loyalists. Some of them were sent to Canada. Some of them later went on to Sierra Leone. And some of them were distributed throughout the British colonies in the West Indies. And people like George Liele ended up in Jamaica. So George Liele used to preach at Kingston Race Course. Started a major Baptist church. In that Baptist church came a man named Paul Bogle. He later met a young former member of the House of Legislation, what they used to call them, MLCs, members of the Legislative Council. That former member was a man by the name of George William Gordon. You all know George William Gordon was in Parliament at one point, right? During those days and up to Garvey's time, we only had one member of Parliament per parish. What parish did George William Gordon represent? Saint? Nope, not at first. George William Gordon entered the Legislative Council representing the parish of St. Elizabeth. But hear what? George William Gordon's mother was a black woman, a Negro woman. His father was white. Now you had a lot of them, quote-unquote, mulattoes in Jamaica. That didn't start in Jamaica. That started in Africa from the slave forts. White men having babies with black women. Some of these babies they would send to Europe and train them. Some of them actually came back and ran the slave forts. In Jamaica, it was the same thing. A lot of them were not owned by their father. Some of them were. Some of them were owned, educated, and then inherited their father's property status. George William Gordon wasn't owned by his father until he turned about 12. Because he turned out to be a bright boy. And fathers, when they're getting old sometimes, you rethink your position. So George William Gordon was educated, went to work with his uncle in St. Elizabeth. Very smart man. Ended up becoming the MP or MLC for St. Elizabeth. But when he went to Parliament, because he had lived with his mother, raised with his mother. His mother was a Negro. She was enslaved. So George William Gordon grew up amongst his enslaved brothers and sisters until he was 12. By the time he went to Parliament, he still identified himself as a Negro. This is what he knew growing up. His father never owned him till he was 12. Now when he gets to Parliament, a lot of the other mixed race mulattoes, if you guys laugh, I go and look for what's funny, you know. I'm very sensitive. I hear everything you say, every movement. So if it's a joke, I don't like get left out. Don't frighten for see yourself on camera. When Gordon gets to Parliament, he's concerned with the plight of black people because this is what he knows. His mothers, his brothers, his sisters, his cousins. He's advocating for them. The other members of Parliament look on this brown boy and say, but look how you get status and you get position and your father own you. And you come here and talk about these niggers. No. The other parliamentarians didn't like him. And so when re-election was coming up, they did everything to make sure he was not re-elected. And that's how he lost his second election. and did not return to represent St. Elizabeth. After that, he pull up shop and him start hanging out at the Native Baptist Church that George Lyle had founded around this time. Lyle was very old. No, Lyle was dead actually. But his church was still established and operating. So it is at this church that he meets Paul Bogle. Now listen to me carefully. I'm off topic, but this is an important thing, and we're talking about Kingston. In those days, as a black person or a white person, it didn't matter. In those days, we didn't have what they call adult suffrage. What is adult suffrage? We didn't get that till 1944. The right to vote, right? The fact that you're a citizen. If you're born here and you turn of age, you should have a right to vote. Whether you can read or write, whether you're rich or poor, whether it don't matter. Just from the fact of being a citizen, you should have a right to vote. That never existed until 1944. In George William Gordon's time and Paul Bogle's time, only property owners who paid their property taxes and were male, good point, could vote. How many black people you think owned property at that time? Remember after slavery, what we get? We got nothing. The planters, them get 21 million cash, them get 26 million more 4 years of free labor. Fool us into thinking we're apprentices. Or we can, you're an apprentice at the beginning of your job, you know, not at the end. Them fool us and we go back on the plantation 4 more years. We give them $26 million value of time and labor. And then we left the plantation with nothing. No property, nothing. We had to pay them rent. Some of us chump up and save and we start to buy little property. Well, by 1865, hear what? George William Gordon and Paul Bogle come up with a plan. Gordon is not going to run for St. Elizabeth. He's going to go to St. Thomas. And he's going to use his money and he's going to buy a large tract of land. So say him buy like a 3 acre. And he decides to cut it up into small amounts. Listen to me carefully. And through Paul Bogle, they distribute this land to black people now. And Gordon does the paperwork and make sure everybody property tax is paid, so everybody now have a title. Them stamp where them say them pay tax. That means they can now do what? Vote. So William Gordon now go back at St. Elizabeth. Him decides him going to run in St. Thomas because he has now created Jamaica's first garrison. And I know garrison is a bad thing now, but when him started it, it was a visionary thing. He created a garrison because he has now added to the voters list a homogeneous block of people who is only him them are going to vote for. Can him give them house, and give them land, and give them property tax. And I get a lot of controversy when I tell people this, that the House of Parliament is named after the first man who built the first garrison in Jamaica, and it wasn't in Kingston. Right? And this is how he serious impact on Marcus Garvey. In fact, when he dies in 1914, Garvey eulogizes him and has a big memorial in his honor. But Robert Love is not the first black member of the Legislative Council. And when I say black now, I mean black mother, black father, because this is after George William Gordon. Anybody know who the first full black? You can't say that? Full black? Here one time when I was saying fully done, like that was something to be proud of. I couldn't, sometimes I can't figure it, you know. Kachiat, so I go, Kachiat. I lie, I go. Can't keep up with no man. Anybody know who was the first black man in our House of Legislation? Nobody? What? These are the kind of things I don't understand. How you have a country 90% black people and we rule for so long by the 7% minority. And afterwards we just blink it away like this is not an important thing. It's very important to know who is the first black people to tear down these walls in this country. The first black man to go to become a member of the Legislative Council was a man by the name of Alexander Dixon. And he went to Parliament representing what parish? Guess, which parish you think sent the first black man? You're Googling? No? You come from St. Elizabeth? I don't know who answered, but you're absolutely right. I thought that would stump you because them always say brown people come from St. Elizabeth. St. Elizabeth again. How can we do more for black people? So they decide to back somebody for who is running to represent St. Thomas. And St. Thomas is the parish where them said the blackest have we come from. You know that, right? Or the parish with the most African retention. The man that was running for St. Thomas was a man by the name of SAG. They call him Sandy Cox, C-O-X. C-O-X. Sandy Cox. Sandy Cox led a group called my Alzheimer's kicking in. The National Club. The National Club, yeah, that sound familiar, Duane? The National Club. National Club was, as he said, you had a lot of fraternal and orders. In those days, it was a social outlet for people to sit and talk and plan. How do we do this? How do we do that? So one of the biggest challenges for your club was to find a meeting space. And when it's black people gathering to talk about some revolutionary thing, we have to be careful where we meet. We can't rent the white boy them space or sit up in them space and plan to overthrow them. Right? So you needed people like Robert Love. You needed people like Alexander Dixon. These are men of position. And they would go about finding the spaces for us to meet. One of the first spaces that they used was, and that Garvey later used, because this is the first social club that Garvey becomes a part of. After he joins the strike to organize the union at P.A. Benjamin, and they strike in January of 1906, I believe. They lost the strike, you know. Well, I don't know if they lost it, but management kind of undercut them, met with the workers, satisfied some things, and the workers came back to work, and the strike fell apart. And then the management turned around and said, everybody will help organize the strike, which is particularly of management level, because Garvey was a foreman. You're all fired. Remember, this is the days before our uni. You can't do that nowadays. You can't just fire them so. But back in those days, this was the early days of trying to get people to leverage their collective security. That's what union is. Meaning, I know if I don't come at work, that are nothing to the boss, you know. But if the whole of we not come at work, it's a problem. So Garvey tried to show them that. And when they struck, the man them undercut him and called the man them one away and say, yo, well, put a little chop and span on the thing, no, for no go back at work right now. And the man then run back at work for the choppers. And then him turn to the organizer and say, I just bust your strike done. Hold on to pack up on the thing and left. Cause I can't trust you. That's how bosses think. The next thing I go try to organize something else, just go about your business. So Garvey was out of work. So not only is he now out of work for trying to advocate for black people, he have a little time on his hands. He starts his first newspaper in Kingston. He calls it The Watchman. But that's not the first Watchman newspaper that existed in Jamaica. The first Watchman newspaper that existed in Jamaica was started by a man named Osborne and another one. All of them connected to this guy, Sandy Cox. They were colored. They called themselves colored people. Just like George William Gordon. White heritage and black heritage, but they were radical for their age. They side with the black man. They were anti-racist. They weren't, oh, we are right because we brown, so forget them. No, they were like, look, majority of people in this country is black people. We are black people too. So we need to raise. So they started a newspaper called The Watchman from in the 19th century. That newspaper had gone under. So when Garvey comes on the scene and starts his Watchman, it is showing you that Garvey is becoming so politicized. He's knowing the history that these people had fought, had started this battle. This was the name of the newspaper. He wants to continue this legacy. So he's in Kingston. He's out of work for a little time. He starts the newspaper. He becomes secretary of the National Club. So he's meeting people like Robert Love. He's meeting people like Alexander Dixon. He's meeting people like Sandy Cox. He's listening to the talk. He knows what's going on. This is the beginning of the political icon that he becomes. And it started right here in this city. exposure to these progressive men. Remember, he's a little boy, he's in his young 19, 20. Robert Love is already a medical doctor. He has traveled. Him know Frederick Douglass. He's been to Haiti, the great where the great black revolution took place. Him come to Jamaica. He's a member of parliament. He's using his money. He's using his position. He sees a young mentee in the person of Marcus Garvey. And one of his advice to Garvey is that you need to travel and go see the world. You need to understand your place as a black man, not only in Jamaica. If you stay here too long, you get a very narrow worldview. You need to go out and see the world. And Garvey's doing other things through the club. He's practicing his elocution. He's practicing his oratory. He's getting up to date. It's the beginning of a political career for him. All of this while he's living in Kingston. Something else happens while he's living in Kingston too in January 1907. What? What happened to Kingston in 1907? Big earthquake, man, mash up downtown, kill it, boom. I've been trying for the longest time to find anything that suggests, what happened in Pink Lane, how was Garvey affected by it. The closest thing I've come to finding out is that there's a suggestion that on the actual day of the earthquake, Garvey might have been out of town. Because he wasn't working and he have time on his hands, there was an issue in St. Anne's Bay with his father who had been remitted to an infirmary and then to an almshouse. I don't know what almshouse is. We use it as a curse word these days, but it was a real place. Almshouse, yeah. Where you're broke and you're old and you're indigent and you can't take care of yourself. The state carry up and put you in an almshouse. Garvey's father ended up in an almshouse. In fact, there is even a record of a bailiff, a court order for Garvey to come and either pay what is owed for the upkeep or do something with his father, and Garvey don't answer it, so them issue a warrant. I don't know, but what I'm telling you is he had a very tumultuous relationship with his father. Anyway, not because of this warrant or whatever reason. For some suggest that he was actually in St. Anne's the day the earthquake struck. Right? So he comes back to Kingston and the place mash up. Nonetheless, he continues his work with the club. He actually gets another job with the government printry, which is still on Duke Street today, isn't it? Behind Parliament or below Parliament. But he's caught the bug by this time. He's caught the bug. He's fully a Kingstonian. He's connected to major players in Kingston. He's being advised to travel and see the world. And so he organizes, and in 1910, he leaves Kingston and travels to where? Where's the first place Garvey visits? First time traveling out of Jamaica. It wasn't airplane them time, it was ship. Anybody know? Where? Canada? No Google allowed. Google is wrong if Google said Canada. It starts with a C though. It's on the Caribbean Sea. Cuba. That would be a good guess, but no. He never went to Cuba until 1919. But they do speak Spanish. Colombia, no. I give you a hint. They produced the first black female vice president of South America, and she's actually Jamaican descendant. Costa Rica. Costa Rica. Garvey goes to Costa Rica in 1910. Travels also to Nicaragua. Lives also in Panama before returning to Kingston. He's in Kingston briefly. But still reconnecting with the National Club. By this time, Sandy Cox had been elected as the member for St. Thomas, but again, the other parliamentarians do some bamboo business and they got him ejected out of the seat. The National Club began to unravel. Garvey was away, no longer acting as secretary. Robert Love passes away. Alexander Dixon loses his seat and retires. And so the movement begins to flounder. So when Garvey comes back with not much activity going on there, he's caught the traveling bug. He doesn't stay in Jamaica but a few months. Then he figures out a way. There's some people he knows that are heading to London. I forget the name, or I would call it. Maybe it's in my notes. He books passage and he heads to the UK. Also, a little while after that, he arranges for his sister Indiana to join him. All right? So by 1912, he leaves Jamaica for England. And he attends college in England. Even though not formally, he sits in on classes. He travels to Paris, he travels to Madrid, he travels to Monte Carlo, he travels to Bologna, he goes Germany. I don't think you guys understand how well-traveled Marcus Garvey is, you know. And not just a little trip to Costa Rica. Anywhere him go, he takes him step from Costa Rica to Nicaragua, go right up to Panama. He goes to England, he doesn't stop there. So he's visiting places, he's seeing cities, he's observing the world. Anyway, he only stays in London about 2 years, and by 1914, the summer of 1914, he's back on a ship and back where? To Kingston. This time he comes back now. He's a little older. Him no want go catch at Mr. McCormack house at Pink Lane anymore. Maybe Mr. McCormack have some new tenants too, because nobody now wait for you to come back from England for 2 years and the room sit down there. He needs to find new lodgings. So he rents a room at a place at 121 Orange Street, which back then was right on the corner of Orange Street and Charles Street. You guys know Orange Street? And you know Charles Street, runner? So right at that corner, which by the way, Duane, is where we wanted the KSAC to put up that third sign, which them Rinnigan and Mayor change. And anyway, we're still at them. The reason we want them to put up a sign there is because that's where Garvey lived in Kingston in 1914 when he returns from England. And it is at that place that he meets Amy Ashwood, who is also living there with her mother. Amy Ashwood becomes very instrumental in helping Garvey organize the UNIA, particularly because she helped them secure their first office space. Remember, we're talking about spaces in order to operate, which is difficult at that time, black people not owning a lot of properties. So if you do your history, you'll realize that the first letter sent out by the UNIA says offices at 34 Charles Street and 121 Orange Street. It was the room where him rent, where him bed in there, where him put as official address of this big organization that it was about to come. Right? That was made possible by Amy Ashwood. She's the one who got him the space there. Now, Amy Ashwood is about 10 years younger than Garvey. So she's a younger lady at this time. 1914, she's born 1897. So we're talking about, she's about 17 when they meet. He is 27. Fear mother never liked Garvey. You know who this man is about him, you know, want to come catch. But nonetheless, they continue to have a relationship. Amy Ashwood is in her own right a Pan-Africanist. So Garvey comes back as this man who has traveled and met people, and he's met a lot of people in England. I didn't spend any time on who he met in England, but he met some heavy hitters. People like Deuce Muhammad, Ali, who connect him to people like John Edward Bruce. You don't know these names, but in the world of Pan-Africanism, these were people like Robert Love. They were established where they were, they had money, and they were putting their money towards upliftment of black people. So if you wanted to be in this business, these are the people you had to know. Garvey worked for Deuce Muhammad Ali, who ran a newspaper called the African Times and Opinion. Deuce Muhammad Ali later moved to Nigeria, started a newspaper there, and helped bring Nigeria into independence alongside some other Jamaicans, but that's a topic for another day. So Garvey comes back, 1914. He has an idea. He's going to establish this organization, and the organization is established right here in the city of Kingston, corner of Charles Street and Orange Street. That's the address for their business offices. But because it's him little one room with him bed, him can't keep no meeting there. How you going to invite people to a meeting? You can imagine all the way pack up in a little room on Orange Street. So he needs to rent space for a meeting. He goes back to Collegiate Hall, which he's familiar with from his days in the National Club. Anybody know where Collegiate Hall is? I keep saying it like you all know. I forget what they changed the name of this church to, but it used to be known as the Scots, as the Kirk Church. Scots Kirk. Kirk is what Scottish people call themselves. Right? Presbyterian? Is it not Presbyterian? United, what's Scots? Right here on, right over there on Duke Street. The Presbyterian Church on Duke Street, but lower part of Duke Street, round the back, and we had a plaque put up there too in 2014. They have a little space that they call there, not little, it's a hall, it's a meeting place that they call Collegiate Hall. So every time you hear me talking about Collegiate Hall and all these meetings taking place, it's right there at the Scots Kirk Church, where a lot of revolutionary activity was taking place for black people. And it's so funny because when you go in the Scots Kirk Church is one of the old churches in Jamaica that still have segregated pews. Not that they segregate people now, but if you go in the Scots Kirk Church and go upstairs and sit in the pews, you'll realize your foot them longer than the space where them give, so you need them always and knock up on the something them. It's jam-packed up in there, in the pews. And the reason for that is that back in the day, that's where the enslaved Africans used to be designated to sit. So you come to church as the big master with your entourage of enslaved Africans, but them can't sit next to you. Them have to go sit somewhere else in the church. I offer to the church to tear them out and put in some luxurious seating for black people, but they never take me up. They never take me up on the offer. They said, no, it's historical, right? But it is in that church, in that space, that all these meetings take place. And when Garvey comes back in 1914, he's at it. So they're at Scots Kirk, they're holding street meetings in Kingston, they're even holding meetings at the Ward Theatre, newly built at that time. But you know, Ward Theatre expensive, so it's only for the very big meetings, right? Garvey also tours the Hope Farm. Any of you know where Hope Valley Experimental School is? That goes back a time, that used to be Hope Farms Industrial School. Garvey has this idea at this time that he wants to replicate what Booker T. Washington has done in the United States of America. Familiar with Booker T. Washington? Who created the Tuskegee Institute, trying to tell people, black people, that we need to learn practical trades that can help build up our society. So he was about, agriculture and science and, forget about this artsy stuff. You want to go read poetry and write book. That not feed nobody. That was Booker T. Washington's kind of opinion. We need practical things that can create food for people. That's what we need to focus on learning. So Garvey picks up on this idea and he wants to replicate it in Jamaica. Right? But he's busy promoting the UNIA, recruiting, soliciting funds. He puts together an idea that one of the first projects the UNIA is going to do is build an industrial and trading school. And he starts to collect funds for that. But one of the other things he put forward in the UNIA's initial platform is that the reason for building these schools is to provide jobs and things for our people and to save our young women from prostitution. You heard me? When I first encountered that, I had to research it. I'm like, what? What? And then now we have to step back and understand Kingston as it was at that time. The waterfront was operational, major thing. You used to have U.S. naval ships that came into our port and docked on the waterfront. And anywhere in the world where you have sailors going, believe you me, I've seen it in the Philippines, it happened in Japan, it happened in Korea, it happened all over the world. Sailor them where they are sea for years, months at a time, and a woman up on the ship. So you find that they attract a certain kind of industry around them. So this was a big issue in Kingston at the time that Garvey noted that it was such an issue that he put it into the foundation of the purpose of the UNIA, that we have to do these things, because when I look in Kingston, all I see is the women prostituting themselves on the waterfront for these sailors that are coming in. Very serious thing to consider. Victoria Pier. Coincidentally, our monarch just died the other day, right? Queen Elizabeth. And this is the first for my generation. My father's generation were children when her father died and she came to power in 1952. Now my generation and your generation is seeing for the first time a monarch of Britain dying and changing. Well, while Garvey lived, that happened twice. Queen Victoria died in 1901, and then in 1910, Fiar's son died and the next one came to power. So there was a lot of shifts and things happening, right? In fact, I'm sure the statue of Queen Victoria in the park downtown was probably commissioned and built at some time around this time after she died, when Garvey was in Kingston organizing and noting certain things. So he leaves in 1916, sorry. So comes back to Jamaica, he's only here for 2 years, launches the organization, identifies some of the problems that the organization is to address. But he leaves to go and meet with Booker T. Washington because he's still on this plan of an industrial training school to save our people from prostitution and crime. Because these are the only options open to us, apparently. We want to build up our own industries. So this is the plan that Garvey sets out to do. But when he gets to the United States, Booker T. Washington had died already. He doesn't turn right back around. He decides to organize branches of the UNIA there. The branch is not functioning well without him. So by 1917, 1918, after being there a year plus, after traveling throughout the United States, he decides that he's going to stay in the United States and take charge of the UNIA there. But the first UNIA is here, the Kingston Division, still going on, still operating. In fact, when we talked about Liberty Hall earlier, the first Liberty Hall was established in 1919 in Harlem, where Garvey was. Ours was about the 4th or 5th. Panama beat us, Costa Rica beat us. But the Kingston Division established a Liberty Hall in 1923. Garvey was not here when we did that. I know a lot of times people associate it with Garvey, but it should rightfully be associated with the Kingston Division of the UNIA. But before I get to a close, I wanted to touch on every point of Garvey's Kingston experience. So he's away from 1916, but guess what? Sir Duane mentioned the Black Star Line. There were actually 4 ships of the Black Star Line. The 4th one was the problem that landed them into court, even though that was a setup by the FBI. But did you know that the Black Star Line came to Jamaica in 1921? Garvey went on an extensive tour of the Caribbean and Central America to promote the Black Star Line, to sell more stock so that he could buy more ships. Leaving from New York to Cuba, and then from Cuba to Jamaica, then from Jamaica to Panama, then going on to Costa Rica and back to Panama before getting into the United States. 1921. And I get these stories from the court records. So Garvey came here about late spring 1921 with a large entourage. He did not come on the Black Star Line. He left Cuba. He left the Black Star Line in Cuba and came on another ship ahead of the Black Star Line arriving here, which came a few weeks after. And some of his enemies were testifying in court, saying he was living it up while he was in Kingston on this Black Star Line tour. And Garvey would question them back, well, did I stay in a hotel? Because there are big hotels in Kingston, like the Myrtle Bank Hotel. And of course, in the 1920s, like how we have uptown now and downtown. Uptown was downtown them time there. We didn't go uptown physically until after the 30s and 40s, even late 50s, coming into independence. This whole idea that rich people now live on the hill and poor people live on the waterfront, which again doesn't happen nowhere else in the world. I've traveled to many places. I've been to Brazil. The ghettos are in the hills. The rich people live on the waterfront. I don't know if it's because we are a hurricane country, but somehow that shift took place. But in Garvey's time, it wasn't so. So he was able to rent a home in Kingston while he's here in 1921. And another thing that his enemies testified in court was that he spent a lot of time at Kingston Race Course. The tracks, which is where National Heroes Park is. Little did he know that is where his final remains would come to rest one day, right? He's in Kingston for a few months. He rents a car. He's being driven around. If not, he's taken by horse and buggy. He organizes several meetings, again, including at the Ward Theatre. He rents a car and drives to St. Anne's Bay. All of this to promote stock. He even goes as far as South Manchester to a little town called Resource because they had subscribed so much to buying stocks in the Black Star Line, this one little town in Jamaica, that Garvey decides that he has to go to the town to meet the people himself. Now, the reason he stays so long in Jamaica is that he had intended in 1921 not to go to Central America, but instead to leave Jamaica and go back to the United States to prepare for convention in August. But by the time he's in Jamaica, the Bureau of Investigation led by J. Edgar Hoover was not yet then federal. It wasn't the FBI yet. It was the BOI. Had already begun to prepare a file on Marcus Garvey, who they nicknamed the Black Tiger. And Hoover wrote to the president to say, this man is a problem, he's a troublemaker, he's a Negro agitator, he might be a communist. Was he a communist? No. Garvey got word of this intel, and that's why you find in his writings, he's so vociferous in pronouncing, I am not a communist. Because he realized there was a move afoot to cause a problem with him in the United States. Hoover also writes to the president and said, we have not yet found a reason to incarcerate this man or deport him, but we are searching for one. The man not commit no crime, you know. This is 4 years before Garvey is put on trial for mail fraud. They are already plotting that we have to find a way to either put him in jail or deport him because he's a problem. So they try the easy route that when he leaves to come to Kingston, return to Kingston in 1921, the Bureau of Investigation issues to the State Department that this is a simple way of trying to do it. They say, don't give him a visa for come back. Yeah, the visa regime had started 1913, but it wasn't as hard to get as it is today. Matter of fact, we weren't Jamaicans then, we were British citizens, and so you could get a... But particularly they said, Marcus Garvey, don't give him none. So he's trying to, as a Jamaican, re-up his visa to go back in Kingston, and Kingston U.S. consul is telling him, no, sorry sir, we can't help you. By this time, you know, Marcus Garvey is the Marcus Garvey. The whole world know about him from 1920. This is 1921. This is in the height of his career. And he can't understand. What you mean you're not giving me no visa? But I live in New York. Everybody know I live in New York and I do my work in New York. What you talking about? They say, sorry, we can't issue no visa. That's why he changed his route and he goes on the Black Star Line to Costa Rica. In Panama, which was a major U.S. embassy at the time, because we didn't have an embassy then, we had a consul. Embassy was in Panama. He goes to Panama and he telegrams nobody lesser than the U.S. Secretary of State. And the only reason Garvey gets back in is because sometimes the U.S. agencies are not in sync with the White House. You know, them have their own agenda. So the Bureau of Investigation issues this bull. Don't give him no visa. But he contacts the Secretary of State. Now, at this point, the politicians understand that Garvey controls a large block of votes because he controls a large number of black people, both in the Southern America, Northeast, going across to the West Coast. The UNIA is heavy. We didn't have 1,400 Liberty Halls When Mr. Harris said that, I think what he was referring to is the fact that we had 1,400 divisions of the UNIA. Not everyone had a Liberty Hall. But 1,400 divisions means that you're talking about millions of members. And the reason why Garvey is able to get his visa is because the Secretary of State understands the kind of influence that this man yields. So when he calls the Secretary of State and says, Brethren, them now about what's going on with my visa. I'm in Panama, I had to leave Kingston. I'm in Panama, I need to get back to New York. Where's my visa? What's the problem with your visa, Mr. Garvey? They didn't give me. Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I'll look at it immediately. So he's issued a visa, and this is how he's able to return to New York. But because of that incident, when Garvey gets back to New York, the first thing he does is what? A lot of Jamaicans don't know this, and we don't tell this part of his story. First thing he does when he gets back to New York is apply for U.S. citizenship. Yes, Garvey had an application in for U.S. citizenship. Not because he didn't love being a Jamaican, I don't know. But because he realized that because of his status of being a British, needing a visa to travel, they were messing around with him. So he knew that if he had a U.S. passport, he wouldn't have this issue. And he had a lot of traveling to do if his plans were going to go the way they were supposed to go. But this also had a domino effect on the Bureau of Investigations. Because they get word now that Garvey has applied for U.S. citizenship. That means that even if we arrest him on something going forward, if he's a U.S. citizen, he will go to jail, but we can't deport him. Because he's now, you can't deport your own citizen. So they decide that they got to speed up this thing, which is why they choose to go after him for mail fraud, and which is why the case against him was so weak that they put him on trial with 4 other people, and him is the only man get convicted. And they give him the full 5 years. And then, not only do they give him the full 5 years, when he goes to jail, he threatens, because a U.S. election was coming up in 2 years, he threatens to use his influence to make the Republican Party lose the election. They begin to negotiate with him and agree that they will give him a pardon. The U.S. government, the U.S. president will pardon him, release him from prison on the condition that him help support their voters in the South, and on the second condition that there's immediate deportation. So Garvey is in jail from 1925. He's supposed to be in jail until 1930, but by the end of 1927, November, they release him from prison, put him on a train to New Orleans, put him on a ship that brings him back to Kingston, December 2nd, 1927. In fact, if you go to Gloria's, you guys know Gloria's, the fish place downtown? On the wall going up the stairs is a big picture of Garvey. That picture was taken when he stepped off the ship in 1927. It was front page of the Gleaner with the UNIA officers, with not his wife, Henrietta Vinton Davis, with his niece, and it's his welcome home. So he's able to use his political power to get himself out of prison, but he's unable to convince the government to allow him to stay in the United States. That was the trade-off. So when he's brought back here, he's received on the Kingston Pier with a tremendous crowd. Tumultuous. He comes back here a superstar, bigger than when he came in 1921. Because you know we love the mix-up. So all during the trial and him a go to prison, it just hyping him up more in Jamaica, right? Comes back. We put him on our shoulders, we hoist him up, we carry him to Liberty Hall on King Street to make a big speech tonight. But he's too tired, which you can, a jail him a come from. And he wasn't having a good time in jail either. Pneumonia was bothering him, him have asthma problem. Incidentally, Marcus Garvey was locked up with some of the most interesting people I encountered in my research. Not only was he locked up with rich people like senators who had embezzled money and stuff, but he was locked up with America's greatest train robber. I forget his name. But it's while in prison that Garvey writes a lot of poetry. He writes his greatest thesis called African Fundamentalism. Nurses himself back to health. He appreciates his time in prison because before prison he was working non-stop. He would travel from New York to Philadelphia to Detroit to Chicago. This is all in the space of 2 days. Back to New York again, down to Baltimore, constantly moving. Publish his newspaper every Saturday, look about other businesses, dodge some bullets, come in office and try shoot him too. Right? prison for him really was him get a break for the first time. Get to try and build back him health. So he comes home and he's refreshed. But that night they take him to Liberty Hall. He's not prepared to speak. The crowd is too big to fit inside Liberty Hall that he tells them he will not speak tonight and that they're to join him tomorrow night at the Ward Theatre. And the following night he makes a big speech. Kingston comes out to hear him. The boss is back. He tells them plans that he's going to, what he plans to do with his time here, this and that, and bam, bam, bam. Everybody loves it. Newspaper cover it. He's back. I want to tell you that that night he was deported and came back. You know where he slept? He didn't go to a hotel. Right back to 13 Pink Lane. Right back to 13 Pink Lane. Moved into a hotel the following day or rented a space. He didn't stay long in Jamaica in 1928 though. He comes, he's here December, he spends the Christmas here, but very early in 1928, around January or February, he leaves Jamaica to travel to Geneva, Switzerland. And he takes a route that takes him through Bahamas, Bermuda, then to London. He goes to Geneva, Switzerland. What's in Geneva today? The United Nations, right? Back then it was the League of Nations. He goes to Geneva to present a petition that the UNIA had sent to them from 1922. Garvey follows up by carrying it himself to Sir Eric Drummond, who was then the League of Nations. And I wish I could get into that petition because it's so revolutionary. It speaks about repatriation. It speaks about reparations. It speaks about the rights of black people. It really positions Garvey as one of the first champions of human rights. In fact, the world never know about human rights until black people start telling about human rights. Chattel slavery, which is the greatest crime against humanity. It wasn't until we start saying you can't treat people like this that the concept of human rights even came into being. Marcus Garvey took it a step further to say you owe it back. And that's what he went to do in 1928. So 1928, much of it was spent in Europe. He spoke at the Royal Albert Hall in London, had a big thing, went to Europe, went to Paris, went to Geneva, comes back, visits a few islands. And by the end of 1928, it's a whole year, him get deported at the end of 27 now. He spends a whole year away from Jamaica. When he comes back towards the end of 1928 to Kingston, him ready now. Him have a plan. And so 1929 is jam-packed with events. Number one, he has his first international convention. But before doing that, while he was away in 28, Henrietta Vinton Davis, that lady in the picture next to him, if you look down at Gloria's front page of the Gleaner, who was the international organizer for the UNIA, a woman who Garvey refers to as the greatest woman of the Negro race. Now, me couldn't get away with saying that about some other woman who is not my wife. But so powerful this woman was as an orator, second only to Garvey probably, that this was the woman he sent to organize UNIA divisions all over the world. She came to Jamaica several times, Cuba several times, Florida several times. In fact, they claim that when the Black Star Line was in Virginia, Newport, Virginia, one night, the Ku Klux Klan boarded the ship, determined to burn it down, and everybody else chuck off of the ship, and this one woman stand up on the deck and tell the white man, them say, no, no, burn this down. Yeah, only a black woman can do things like that. Only a black woman can do things like that. Trust me. There's a film called Rosewood. You should watch it when the Ku Klux Klan come to lynch a black man. And the black woman come out on the porch. And she looking at this crowd of white men with them guns and them torches, you know. And she started to call them by name. And like she said, Peter, is that you? I used to change your nappy when it was a baby. And she said, George, what are you doing out here with that gun? Huh? I remember when I used to feed you milk as a little, because she had been this older woman who had nannied all of these white people in the town. And by the end of the thing, every man had looked down upon the ground. Every man take with themselves go. Because what are you going to tell a woman that raised you from your baby? She have an impression on your psyche. You cannot lift your hand to her. That's why I say only black women have them kind of power there in the world. Right? But anyway, Henrietta Vinton Davis in 1928 purchases Edelweiss Park, 67 Slipe Road, where Rainforest is right now. And she begins to prepare the place because Garvey is communicating to her. He doesn't only want, he not only establishes the St. Andrew division of the UNIA, and this is what people have to realize. When Garvey came back, he did not take over back the Kingston division. The Kingston division was a well-oiled machinery, had its own Liberty Hall, had its program. He allowed them. He moved a couple blocks up the road, purchased Edelweiss Park, established the St. Andrew division, of which he became president and president general of the whole. And he starts to build up there. Edelweiss Park was owned by a German Jew who sold it to him. He had something set up there. Garvey extended it. So it became not only a meeting place and offices. He had offices for his Black Man newspaper, but he also purchased a printry to do the actual printing of the newspaper at 7 Peters Lane, also downtown here in Kingston. I don't manage to get a sign up there yet, but may I work on that too, right? He sets up Edelweiss Park now for a major convention in 1929 because he's inviting international delegates to come down. He also sets up an entertainment space for people to perform nightly at stage events and sets up a boxing ring. Garvey then brings down from New York Kingston's and Jamaica's first soda fountain. Imagine that. You guys take things simple right now. You're going to Mother's or Kentucky and get the free soda. Soda fountain never come here till 1928. And Marcus Garvey was the first person to bring it here. And back then it was not like one you just buy now and plug it in. It was a whole thing, man, whether it use brine or using ice or however it worked. And the biggest thing was to get ice cream and then you pour the soda and it was a whole, you know. You know, like how we go for ice cream on Sunday. On Sundays, you would go to the soda fountain to get the soda and get the root beer, get the this, get the that. Garvey brings it down. So Garvey at this point is very mindful of his world experience, and he wants to bring that to Kingston. And he should really be credited for trying to lift the cultural landscape in Kingston. On his stage, people cutting their teeth in the performing world were like Ronnie Williams. Now here's a man that have a center named after himself right now, but he was introduced to the stage by Marcus Garvey. Bim and Bam, Kid Harold. Garvey used to put on boxing displays, and so young Jamaican boxers used to come up and do boxing at Edelweiss Park. So he's back in 1929, he's got an amusement place, but guess what happens in 1929 also? His wife gets pregnant. He's about to have a family. This is a man who is already an icon in the world, but he has spent so much time organizing for black people. He didn't start a family while he was in New York. So now it's not enough for him to stay at Pink Lane or to rent places. When a man knows, say, you have a baby on the way now, you need to start thinking about a home. And so he buys that property up on Lady Musgrave Road. In fact, that property was really paid for by his wife. Yes, his wife is a descendant of the first mayor of Kingston, Captain John Jakes. Great-granddaughter is Amy Jakes. Captain John Jakes used to live on a little estate there he had off of Mountain View. It's now known as Jakes Road, the Jakes Road community. Right? He has some money, and like any father would, like I would hope that when my daughter is of age and tell me she's about to start a family, you know, you want some money, you give her a little money if you get a house and make sure she's all right. People have to realize, you know, Garvey was not rich. Every money him have been put into the movement, which is why it's such a tragedy that he went to jail under the suspicion of defrauding people. The only person he would have defrauded himself. Because Garvey was a major shareholder. Nobody had as much stocks in the Black Star Line as he did individually. But yet you put him on trial, say him a try thief black people money. It's sad. Him a thief him own money. Right? So he never even had money to buy his property here. His father-in-law gave him some money and he purchases that property. He lived originally until he built a home on the other side. And on the other side, I'm talking about right beside the AC Hotel, in fact, Heritage Trust, they knocked that building down. And I know the minister was aware. I don't know if you guys are aware. And I went over there and I was asking questions. Well, how could they? They did it during COVID. I said, how could they knock the building down? Because there was a plaque put up on that building by Heritage Trust said, Marcus Garvey used to live here. And the two front gates. Back then, you people, Jamaicans would name their houses. You guys too young to remember that? You build a house, you name it. And you put a name on the gate. So Garvey named his property Somali Court. Interesting, right? And you think it's Somalia, Somali people are from Somalia. So once he built the new house for his family, his wife is about to have baby, he turned that side of the property into his private offices. So his private offices, he had a library there, and he also had a real estate company that operated from there, because that's Marcus Garvey. His first experience in buying property here, and him figure him can do this, so him can buy property for other people, so him start a real estate company, right? This is 1929. So he has Edelweiss Park operating, amusement company, purchases a home, builds a home for his pregnant wife. By August of 1929, he has his first UNIA International Convention here. By September, immediately following the convention, he launches the first modern political party, as mentioned by Duane, known as the People's Political Party. This causes a problem for him. First of all, his problem started from in August, because in his international convention, they had begun to raid his businesses, saying that he owed debts from libel suits that he was taken to court about. Garvey lived in court. Garvey says something on the steps of the War Theatre and somebody don't like it, them carry him go to court the next day. Right? And so he was fighting these different trumped up political charges. There was one particular judge, Judge Barrett, who was the head of, would be equivalent to the head of the Court of Appeals now, who just never liked the man. The public prosecutor at one point at that time was Norman Manley also, and all him and Garvey nearly come to blows. There's a talk about Garvey getting offended by something he says and challenging Mr. Manley to step outside and let's handle this like men. But then somebody whispered to Garvey, say, oi, that man the old boxing champion for Upper JC. You know, I don't know how many of you know that Norman Manley was a boxer, was very athletic in school. And so when Norman never moved for go outside, Garvey never pressure it too hard, you know? Never pressure it. But even them became adversaries because of these legal issues, right? When he launched the People's Political Party, he had a 10-point platform. One of those 10 points was that he would imprison corrupt judges. Now, is there anything wrong with saying that? There's nothing wrong with saying you're going to imprison corrupt judges, right? Well, guess what? The following morning, Judge Barrett come to his office, read the headline and say, what? Issue a warrant for his arrest. Why? Because he says to Garvey, you are implying that there are corrupt judges. And that's libel. And therefore, you either go and pay X amount of £1,000, some ridiculous something in game, or you're going to do 3 months in prison. Garvey does the 3 months in prison. So not only is he deported from prison abroad, comes back to Kingston, we put him on trial. Within 9 months of him really living here, because I told you the whole of 1928, he was on the road in Europe. So when he finally settled down, not even a year passed, we not put him on trial. And the man said, him not pay the fine because him not do nothing wrong. Judge said, well, go do the 3 months, and them send him out to DP, Spanish Town Prison. But people think there was something else behind it, because guess what? When Garvey launched his political party in September 1929, he decides that he puts up several candidates, right? He puts up candidates for the Legislative Council. He puts up candidates for the parish councils. He himself runs for the parish council representing what would be today the Almond Town Division. By that time, Almond Town Division also would include up towards Lady Musgrave's side, where he was living. Yeah, because you have to run for the area that you live in. Just like how It's not like MPs. MPs can live anywhere and run, but councillors have to live in the division that they run for. So, huh? Or have an address. Supposed to, yeah, but they don't have that caveat for MPs. You don't have to have an address where you live. I see it every election. MP are voting in the next place, but him is an MP for the next place, right? Anyway, Garvey runs for that division and he wins. He wins the seat. And tell me this is not a conspiracy. The KCAC at that time had a thing that said, if once you have won the seat, if you don't come to meetings and take up your council seat, within 3 months, your seat is declared vacant and them can call a by-election. So how convenient is it that the judge decides I'm going to send him go to prison for 3 months right after the man win the seat? Well, him got to prison and that is, you can hear all kind of story, but you ever hear stories say them set bad for him a Spanish town? They was planning to poison him. I know him food had to be checked carefully and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, remember say him just do 2 3/4 year in a federal penitentiary now. So prison not frighten him at this time. He goes, he does his time. Well, they declare his seat vacant while he's still in the prison. And they call a by-election. And Garvey runs in absentee. His name is on the ballot and him win the seat again. And after him do that, within 3 months, when them realize, remember I building back from a story about George William Garden, you know, how them fight him out of parliament, why him have to do for come back in parliament. Here is now Marcus Garvey, years later, launched the first political party. This is before the PNP. The PNP not come about till 1938. JLP not come about till 1943. Marcus Garvey launched his political party in 1929. A full decade before them. Wins his seat. Them try fight him out, him win it back. When them realize say him a come out of jail and him take up him seat now, by the time him attend 3 meetings, the mayor declared the council insolvent and them scrapped the Kingston and St. Andrew Council. Yeah, check your history. Check your history. There have been various times when certain parish councils were scrapped. And them wait a year or 2 years and then them start them back again. There's even been a time that our own legislative council was scrapped following the Morant Bay Rebellion, you know. There was a whole Moines Commission where the governor took back control of the island and was saying, listen, we're not taking no talk from the MLC because they were so worried of what other little things were lingering from George William Garden inside the house. Because when he came back the second time, he was a little bit more diplomatic and him start to draw him different allies. Believe you me, when them executed that man, it was not as simple as it looked. First of all, him never have nothing to do with the Morant Bay thing. The man there in yard with him family when them take him up. He was so shocked. He never even know he was going to die. He might write letter to him wife like, I don't know what the mix-up is, but I'll soon be home. Yeah, well, the next morning, them string him up. It was what he represented. It was a fear of black power in this country that still lingers in the psychology of many of our politicians today. And George William Gordon is the only man to ever sit in that house that has been executed by the state. And them really, Britain should have paid reparations to him family for that. They really should have. Because it was undeserved. Him was not at the protest. Him never march. Him never have nothing to do with nothing. Him not buy no gun, give nobody. Theme garrison was about property ownership and the right to vote. It wasn't about guns. Bogle and them arm themselves when them realize a man a come for them. Which what else you going to do? Me there my yard and here say man a come for me. Me no must arm myself. After me come to your house to talk about it peacefully and you run me away and then you send arm man come to pick me up, me no must arm myself too. Huh? You want to say something?
No, I was just checking on that. Did they go back to send them? Never go back?
You mean to pick him up?
No, I'm talking about after Paul Bogle
Went to
went to
the governor's house. Yeah, after the yeah. No, they went to the courthouse in St. Thomas. They never got back to Spanish Town. Yeah. All right. So, let me wrap up now. So, Garvey comes back. He's in jail. He wins the seat. They dissolve the council. Garvey still proceeds. He now decides to run for the Legislative Council. And he runs for the Legislative Council on the ticket for the parish of St. Andrew. Remember I told you who his mentor was before? Robert Love, who represented that parish. So Garvey kind of steps into that space. As the mentee, now come of full age. But they were still under the problem of if you were not a property taxpayer, you couldn't vote. And most of the business people and the 7% minority were living. Mean that we treat politics like a party. You never see it yet. You never see them hang out on the bus. You never see the liquor drink. You never see the party go on. Like it's a party thing. And this your ancestors fight for is a party. It's not a party. You got to exercise your franchise carefully. And if you don't like what the opportunities, what they're seeing out there, then push in after Garvey leaves Jamaica. And so by 1962, you find that the two dominant political party has absorbed everybody in the parliament. They're no longer independent members. You had independent members in 44, you know. You had independent members up to 59. But by 62, is one side or the other. Nobody in there independently anymore, much less third party, right? So 1929 is a great year for Garvey, but it's the beginning of his troubles. He does his prison time. He runs again for the big seat in 1930. He loses. He recoups again. He decides he's going to prepare now for another major UNIA convention in 1934. It is a massive convention that Kingston will never forget. Opened up with Madam LTM Demena riding a white horse, a woman on the back of a white horse with a sword in her hand riding down King Street. Tell me if you ever see that in your life. Marcus Garvey did this. Followed by parades of cars, men in uniforms, women in Black Cross nurses. And you know it jiggy. So people are saying, yeah, Garvey think that. But that same year, during the convention, the same Judge Barrett has a case that is brought from one of Garvey's enemies in New York, decides to take it up. He sends a bailiff in the middle of the convention to go and seize the properties at Edelweiss Park, to seize the property at Somali Court, to seize the printry on Peters Lane, to seize everything that him know Garvey involved with in order to settle this debt, which Garvey later appeals. A Jamaican lawyer by the name of Louis Ashenheim appeals and wins the case. But you know, appeals take years and time. By that time, the judge has ordered that this be sold. They seized the Liberty Hall at King Street. That's how we lost it originally. And the appeal took several years before any of them were won back. But by the time they are won back, Garvey is fed up. First of all, if I am a young father and I just have my two sons, because I have him son in 1930, I have another son in 1933, Marcus Jr., then Julius in 33. Them seize him home in 34. That means I have a 1-year-old baby, I have a 4-year-old baby, and Bail, if I put my wife and pick me out the street, Garvey's fed up. He decides he's not staying here. Him can't do so much. Him think for feeding people. And this is how him own country treat him. So him pack up him things, and in 1935 he leaves Kingston. And he moves to London with his wife and children. And he tells his wife he will not come back to Jamaica ever again. Hear me carefully, you know. Garvey leave England several times between 1935 and 1939. You know, him all tour the Eastern Caribbean, Barbados, all these places. Him go Bahamas, him go Bermuda, him go up to Canada. He does not set foot back on this island. Self-imposed exile. You take away my house when me have baby. You take away all the UNIA property on King Street that don't have nothing to do with me, because them build it. And them use it. Even when I came home, I did not use it. I set up a next one at Edelweiss Park. You take away that from them. You take away my car. The house that my father-in-law give me wife money for buy, you take that way too? So Garvey's story in Kingston doesn't end on a high note. Doesn't end on a happy note. Which is the reason why I am so adamant I go everywhere must I go and put up a sign. Everywhere must I go and put up the sign. For make Jamaica never forget. Even though he himself left and said, I'm not coming back here. I cannot live as a man should live. And believe you me, as a father, it's the last one I feel. You could have taken away everything from me, but how can you take my house that my father-in-law pay for? When me bathe my wife and babies, and you send bailiff to put them out the door when them going to sleep tonight. He decides enough is enough. And he leaves Kingston. So all these things we have here, we have Marcus Garvey Drive. We have Marcus Garvey. Marcus don't know nothing about them thing there. In fact, here's how I will end. Garvey never asked somebody if you bring him body back here, come bury me there. You know? Listen me carefully. Because his story is very, very, very... Listen, Garvey dies a few weeks before the Germans bomb London, you know. Understand that when Garvey died in London, it was World War II was about to mushroom. A few weeks before the first time the Germans ran a bombing raid on London is when he died. And how he died is even sadder. I'm not going to tell you that story. But in 1937, while he was away on his one of his last UNIA tours, second to last, his last one was in 38. He had his first stroke in 39. And it was the second stroke in 1940 that killed him. The first stroke in 39 robbed him of speech. You see what a sad story this is? Here's a man who made his life by his oratory. And the first stroke robbed him of the ability to speak. But in 37, while he was away, his wife, Amy Jakes, she felt the weather in London was adversely affecting her eldest child, Marcus, who had asthma and thing like his father. But her husband don't tell her, say, him nah go back to Jamaica over him dead body ever. So while he's away on a UNIA tour, she pack up the children and she comes back home to her father. Garvey returns to his house, an empty house, and I can feel this as a father. His wife is gone. His children are gone. Back to the place where him tell them, say, he will never go. What you expect him to do? Women, what you expect the man to do? We must broke we word and come back after we done lay down the law, so we not go there. Huh? Garvey is so vexed him never talk to him wife again. A lot of people don't understand how their relationship ended. He would write letters and put money, pounds in the envelope to his children. How are you? So and so. Here's some money for school shoes. Here's this. Blah, 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 blah. Not one letter in there say, hi mom, how are you? The letters is addressed to him children. The money is for him children. He don't talk to his wife again, you know. Guess what happened now after the first stroke? Guess who come to the door and starts to help take care of him? Can't remember him wife gone now, you know. Now you have strokes. Maybe you can't even go to the bathroom by yourself. But your wife gone. Oh, who is the lady living in London at this time? Amy Ashwood. The same one that he met in Kingston. The first wife. Were divorce and sue and counter sue and now chat to him for years. At the end of his life, this is the woman beside him. So much so that when the government of 1964, the Buster government, it was Edward Seaga was in charge of culture, went to have the body brought back home, they needed a release. And that release was not to come from Amy Jakes. She couldn't sign because I know she signed for bury him in the first place. At the first Amy. had to sign for the body to be released, to be sent back to Jamaica. What a mix-up, right? And this talk about whether it is Garvey's body or not is crazy. It's the same crazy talk we had when the body came in 64. So much so that they opened the coffin for people to look. Are you crazy? You can't open a coffin after a man dead for 24 years? I thought, but that is how Jamaican people are. I know Garvey in there, Garvey can't dead, blah, 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 blah. Till the man them can't take the talk so much so that they open the coffin. They should have not opened the coffin. Nobody wants to see or smell that. Even though the body was embalmed, there's a picture. There's a picture of him in the coffin, you know. You remember it with it bloated and look like. Understand this. That undertaker should be given a medal. Because the body was still intact. 24 years after I'm dead, when them opened the coffin, the body was still intact enough that they could identify him. Right? That undertaker need a medal. Because me would I expect say a bone them start shell out already. Right? So this is how Garvey's stories end. This is how Garvey's story ends. It's a curious one. I hope I have shared enough with you to see how much Garvey is ingrained and embedded in Kingston, culturally, politically, and otherwise. He cut his teeth in this city. He came to political maturity in this city. He left this city and became one of the first black icons of the 20th century. And when I say icon, I mean globally. First time white people meet the king of Swaziland, which is a southern African kingdom. They call themselves Eswatini now. First white man will meet the king of Swaziland. And I tell him, say, black people, about black people in America. He said, I didn't know there were so many black people in America. I only know of two. Jack Johnson, first black heavyweight boxing champion of the world, and Marcus Garvey. Short little Jamaican man come from St. Anne's Bay. The king of a far removed African kingdom, way down in South Africa, told that to people, say, him only know of two black people in the West. One is an American boxing champion, and the other is this man from St. Anne's Bay. Give thanks.
Wow. What an interesting story. Mr. Golding, enough stories, enough things we learned today. I need 5 students to stand and tell me one thing they learned from this presentation today. Before we go into the comments and the questions, I need 5 students to tell me 5 things you learned about Marcus Garvey today. So each student tell me one thing. All right. Any student? Tell me one thing you learned about Marcus Garvey today. You, young miss, state your name and the school you're representing.
Um, Afternoon. My name is DJ Nelson, and I'm representing Charlie Smith High School. And what I really get from Marcus Garvey, he have go through a lot. He have go through a lot of storm to build back a block, to build back the black category of Jamaica, because even his own abilities fight him out. Even his own kind fight him out. But he still make up his mind, say, Erwa, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. But him come to a time now when him done all him works, him decide say, I'm gonna left the country and go away because of too much fight them again. Well, me understand that the sad part about it is to know that him done so much work, and for no say me have to just left the place to make peace.
Big
That's a very
sacrifice. Big
that's a
sacrifice.
big
Thank you so very much
sacrifice.
for that. That's so true. All right, another student, please. State your name and the school you're representing.
Um, good,
I
good
can
afternoon.
can we all listen, please? Thank you.
Good
Yes, sir.
afternoon.
Go ahead.
I'm representing the Dunankara High School, and I've learned so much today. But I would just like to summarize everything that, even though Marcus Garvey left Jamaica many a times, he had always made his way back here to help his people, to protect his people, and to fight for his people's right. So I truly give thanks for Marcus Garvey and his work that he did to protect us and give us a future for today, and made so much ways that we could have lived and without slavery or whatever. So that's what I've learned and summarized in my own words.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, can we have that young man up there? State your name and the school you're representing.
Okay. Okay, my name is Michael Reed, and my name is my name
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
my name is Michael Reed, and I come from Donald Corey High School. What I learn about Marcus Garvey, him always fight for our country, and him do not back down from no fight. All when times tell him wife that said him still not come back at Jamaica. Him they really want to come, but how him say him put on him foot and him say him not coming back, so him not coming back. And Marcus Garvey do a lot for Jamaica. Him always fight for our people, and that is the end. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so very much. Okay, we have two to go. Can I hear from the females? Thank you so very much. This young lady right down here. Stand for me, please. State your name and the school you're representing.
Good, good, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Akila Thompson, and I'm representing the Kingston Technical High School. One thing that I've learned today is that the Ward Theatre, it was established in 1911, and it was also a gift to Kingston. And Marcus Garvey held political meetings there between 1920 and 1930.
Very good. Excellent. 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 Can I hear from Holy Childhood? And we'll take the final one from Holy Childhood. Stand and state your name. Thank you.
Time, his fame, everything to making sure that black people knew their place. I would say he was the forefather of human rights, as you would have mentioned. And I love that he spent his time advocating for us, making us privy to our strength as black people.
Excellent. 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 Excellent points. And I'm so happy that you have learned something and you have something to take back home with you. And please share the knowledge that you have learned here today. All right, we will go right into the question and answer and the comments. And I have my lovely teacher up there. She has been waiting a while to pose her question. Okay.
Through the nitty gritty of it. Of course, you have the book knowledge of Marcus Garvey's general philosophies and so on, but the blow by blow nitty gritty is very, very refreshing. And I want to say publicly that I support this idea of basically enshrining all of the places that Marcus Garvey would have traveled in Kingston. And I want to propose that in the same way that we have the Heritage Trust has the Heritage Trail, that, you know, not just to put up a sign and each one is different, but that there's a thread in the same way that the presentation had this thread, to be called something like Footprints of Marcus Garvey. 1, 2, 3, according to the chronology of where he would have been and so on. And so it is very clear. So somebody who would have done, we would be able to do a heritage trail of Marcus Garvey through Kingston, kind of thing, from one point to the other point to the other point. So I'm suggesting that it could be done in that kind of way, a seamless kind of way, and, you know, we would have something to look forward to and to mark it in terms of our heritage. And the second thing I want to ask is a question related to Edelweiss Park. I couldn't help but notice, I noticed it before, but I couldn't help but notice here the irony of Edelweiss Park. And you did answer a little part of it by saying that it was a German Jew would have been that individual who would have made that connection. But yeah, but I understanding when it was established and Marcus Garvey's ideas in the first place. I wonder if Marcus Garvey, well, I'm not saying that I wonder. Marcus Garvey was well-traveled and very knowledgeable. So he would have been aware of the connection to German Nazism. I wonder if it is ironic that the flower, the Edelweiss flower, which is based on how it's grown in the hills of the Alps and so on, and what it represents. So the German Nazis used it to represent Nazism, and of course all of the cruelty and inhumanity that would have taken place with that. But to now take the flower and what it represents to now, you know, turn it the other way. I was asking about it, but I guess in asking about it, I found the answer myself. I don't know. But I wonder if either of you could respond to it based on the understanding of Edelweiss Park.
Remember when Garvey purchased Edelweiss Park, it was before
The,
Hitler started his rise to power from about 1935-36. It was after Garvey lost Edelweiss Park.
well,
Interestingly that you mention it, because one of the statements that Garvey was sometimes condemned for is when he says something like, you know, before there was Hitler and Mussolini, there was Garvey.
yes.
It's a statement he made in one of his papers. He said, before there was Hitler, before there was Mussolini, there was Garvey. And a lot of people remember Garvey had an aggressive program for national development based on this concept of our African culture and building an African empire. So Garvey used to put men in uniforms and have them marching down the street. It's the same program that Adolf Hitler adopted in Germany in order to propel Germany out of the debt and quagmire they were in
After World War One.
World War One.
Right.
It's intense national socialism, right?
But
So what Garvey was saying in his statement was basically that what those men were doing in the late 30s is what he was trying to do for black people in the early 20s.
indeed.
But of course, Garvey died in 1940, so before Auschwitz, before the final solution, as they called it, for the Jews. Garvey never saw all of that. What he saw was the early days of the brown shirts and this advocating that Germany militarize itself and step toe to toe and stop taking crap from the rest of the world, which is what he wanted black people to do for themselves.
I agree, though, that yes, there was Marcus Garvey before both of them. Just to say, though, that Mein Kampf was written 1925, which was little earlier. That and even though the Holocaust would have started a little bit later, all of these ideas and plans were in Hitler's mind before. But I agree.
Have you read Mein Kampf?
Yes, I have.
It's a good book. Don't laugh. I've read it. And one of the reasons I read it is because Garvey read it too. So you're right. Hitler wrote that book shortly after World War One, after he had recovered, when he was trying to figure out what he was going to do before he actually started getting active in politics. So the Mein Kampf book, though, I don't think it shows you the full extent of Hitler's mind at the time of the so-called Holocaust, right? It was a young Adolf. And people have to understand that Hitler wasn't this evil person that if he was, nobody would have put him in power. He was very charismatic. He had an idea that a lot of German people logged on to. It might have gone wrong somewhere along the road. In fact, the politics of the time makes you have to put that caveat in there. Oh, it went wrong, blah, blah, blah. But Hitler never put nobody in no concentration camp himself. He just motivated people in a way that they did all kind of things. Let me tell you something. The camera's still rolling.
Yes.
I'm sure I'm going to see this later in my life. I watch Hitler speak, and I can't speak German. But the man give me goosebumps sometimes when him talk. I don't even understand what he's saying. But just the power of how he fixes his face. And Hitler will be, and I feel like, you know, I don't even know what he's saying. But I am sure Garvey would have noticed him as an orator, because this was also a craft that Garvey practiced. So when he wrote in The Black Man that before Mussolini and before Hitler there was Garvey, one of the things he could also be saying is that I noticed these men coming up and they are moving masses. But this is what I was doing 2 decades ago. So I can relate to them on that level.
Wow. Thank you so very much. Okay, next question, comment. All right, this young lady up here, can you stand, please? Oh, yes. Could you state your name and the institution?
Warden. I work with the Institute of Jamaica, but I also work with Kingston Creative. Just wanted to verify, Mr. Goulding, where you know have
I'm not a Nazi. What do you want to verify? I'm not a Nazi.
Where you know have rainforest seafood.
Yes.
That is where Edelweiss
That's
Park,
where
right?
it was, exactly.
I understand that the sign was recently taken down.
Not recent. It come down before COVID.
Before COVID.
Yeah, that's not recent.
Okay. I can't. Well, I don't want to go into, but I kind of wanted to know why. But it would.
I asked them when I first noticed it, because like I said, we were the reason that they put the sign up. And what I was told at first was that there was some issue that they was renovating, but that it would go back up.
All right,
But I haven't seen it go back up.
Right.
So I think we give them long enough. May I put on the pressure upon them this year.
So I asked because a fellow tour guide was made aware of it, and we kind of wanted to know because we are also aware of all of where Garvey fits into Kingston, from the waterfront up there, all of that. So that's part one of mine, and I really want that to go back up. Secondly, also verify the flag of Kenya. Has the UNIA colors. Is it influenced by UNIA?
Possibly. Jomo Kenyatta was a UNIA member. In fact, he was a Negro World Runner. He wrote in his own books. A Negro World Runner in Kenya meant that because the British and the French were trying to suppress Garvey's newspaper from getting into the colonies, they would have
it went underground.
They would have to smuggle it. Seamen would smuggle it. So sometimes you'd have like one copy coming into Kenya. And they would have runners that take it to one village, and after it's read by the village, you have a runner that run it to the next village. So Kenyatta said he himself was a runner for the Negro World. Garvey had a lot of secret distributors for his papers. Market, because there was a definite effort to keep the news, that information outside of Africa. So it had to be smuggled in, it had to be snuck from country to country. And Garvey paid these people. Yes.
Right, so reading was the way for black people to understand the world.
Yeah, we didn't have internet those days.
Right.
Imagine if Garvey had internet,
right.
My God.
I say it because when I'm doing my tour to get children in the time so they understand why that had to be done.
Yes. And
So that's the power of the pen.
Garvey published the Negro World in Spanish and French.
Yes. Panama
So,
has their own
yeah,
Liberty
at
Hall,
least
all of
his
that.
section, he wrote an editorial. That section would be reprinted in Spanish and French. So even for like the French colonies in Africa, you know. So he was intentional in trying to get the information out to black people right across the world. And if it wasn't for the colonial powers, his newspaper would have reached much further.
So there's a possibility that the Kenyan flag would have had some
I
inspiration.
would think so because,
Right.
oh, let me not leave this out.
Right.
Jomo Kenyatta was mentored by Amy Ashwood. Amy Ashwood, when she was living in London, set up a club called the Florence Mills Club on Carnaby Street in Oxford Circle, which is a big, high-profile place if you've ever been to London now. But back then, she set it up as a club for Pan-Africanists. So a lot of the first leaders of Africa, first presidents, people like Kenneth Kaunda out of Zambia, Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Kenyatta in Kenya, all of them at some point were studying in London together, and they became part of a unit known as the West African Student Union. They were university students, you know, sitting and reasoning with each other about what we're going to do for when we go back home. This is how we're going to link it. This is what we need to do. Well, it was Amy Ashwood who, because as we were talking about spaces in Kingston for people to meet, Amy Ashwood provided the biggest space in London for young black revolutionaries to meet. So she was kind of like the mother. You know, they would go there, they eat, they drink. Sometimes them broke and can't pay them bill, but Amy was the boss. She would say, no problem, Jomo, no problem. Next time you go. Paul Robeson used to hang out there. So a lot of times she's overshadowed by Marcus Garvey, but in her own right, she's very much a Pan-Africanist who had more influence on those African leaders than Marcus, but he was getting old at that time. He was feeling a little bitter that his thing, that she was the one relaxing, get a little money for spend. You need a place to catch for tonight. You can go stay upstairs, the club. You have people coming in that need to stay there. So Jomo Kenyatta, Kwame Nkrumah, all of them knew her as like a Mama Amy, you know?
Well said.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. All right, can we get the last question? Or you have one as well? All right, we'll take the two before we wrap up. Okay.
It's just a comment. Lorraine Levy-Bell with my girls from Holy Childhood. I know we are focusing on Marcus Garvey, but I must say that the most interesting part for me was when you segued into the role of George William Gordon and, and Marcus Garvey, because it brought to me the fact that it's something I've always said to my girls, history does not occur in a vacuum. So it's just interesting to note that something that would have happened from 1865 and the influence, ripples, are still being felt all the way down to the 1930s with Marcus Garvey. So I really appreciated this presentation, how it was done, allowing us not to just stick to the formal line of just we're doing Marcus Garvey, but allowing us to garner knowledge about other areas, and it was phenomenal. Thank you.
Thank you too. Thank you. All right, we'll take the final comment or question.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Afternoon, sorry. Okay, I'm from Kingston Technical High School. This question might not be directed to Mr. Golding, but probably National Heritage Trust. Since Ward Theatre is obviously a very important feature of our history, right? And I can remember going there as a child. And it's also one of the philosophy of Marcus Garvey, one of his vision for us to have this theater. I was just thinking, what is being done as a country or through NHT to get this theater back up and running? Because the youths of Jamaica don't get to enjoy what really Marcus Garvey wanted us to be a part of. So I was just wondering, what is being done to get it back up and running?
Okay, it is being renovated.
For so long?
Yes, it is. It is. And the Jamaica National Heritage Trust, we are somewhat at a distance involved because it is under the jurisdiction of the Kingston and St. Andrew Municipal Corporation. So they are the ones with the
That are really
responsibility.
doing it.
Yes, right.
So they are holding it up.
They are the ones who are responsible for that.
Okay, I got my
So,
answer. Thank you so
right,
much.
right, definitely. All right. At this moment, I will invite Miss Takia Brownie. Miss Takia Brown. I'm so sorry. Takia Brown, who is our senior artifacts officer, to do the vote of thanks. Help me welcome Miss Brown.
Good afternoon. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, young women and men, good afternoon again. I am honored to move the vote of thanks on behalf of the Jamaica National Heritage Trust for this morning's slash afternoon's proceedings. We are grateful to the Almighty God for giving us life to get here safely and to gain first-hand knowledge on Marcus Garvey and his contributions to the capital city of Kingston. The information was, as we can see, well received. To our presenter, Mr. Duane Harris, thank you for enlightening us on different aspects of Marcus Garvey while he was living in Kingston. Special thank you is extended to our guest presenter, Mr. Stephen Golden, for taking time out of his busy schedule to share with us today on Marcus Garvey's Kingston experience, his trials and triumphs. To OCM Productions, we are grateful for your continued partnership in assisting us in documenting our heritage for everyone to view and enjoy in the future. Thank you to Patsy Lynn Caterers for providing refreshments and to the Institute of Jamaica for facilitating us. To our valued audience here, students and teachers, thank you for making the effort to be a part of these presentations. And to our viewers who are watching online, many thanks for being here with us. We could not have done it without you. As I close, the Jamaica National Heritage Trust, thank you for all attending, and we encourage you to continue to embrace your heritage. Have a good afternoon.
Okay, thank you, Miss Brown. Have a good afternoon, everyone, and get back safely.